Hi, this is Caroline Fraley, and I'm speaking about my assignment 3 for SLIS 758. The creation of a LibGuide was the assignment, and for my health topic, I chose to create a library staff wellness initiative LibGuide, so staff are encouraged to complete a 5K, and the purpose of the site is injury prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. The environment is a public library in a rural area, and the initiative has been put together by a wellness committee in the library system, and they are trying to encourage staff with incentives to complete this race, and they can either choose to run or walk it. The LibGuide is aimed at helping staff to plan their training safely without injury and also to address injury when it happens. So most of the materials on the LibGuide that I created was there to help staff to plan their training effectively, because effective training cuts down on the risk of injury significantly. And also seeks to prepare them for possible injuries and how to avoid them and how to address them if it happens, how to talk to their doctor, what kind of treatment is going to be expected. So the LibGuide is just created to offer resources, mostly scholarly, on those topics. The user community, 80% of the staff has a bachelor's degree or higher. All the staff has at least a high school education. Staff are largely sedentary because they work at desks all day, and many staff members are overweight or obese. There are high rates and risk of diabetes and heart disease, which are some of the major killers nationwide, but particularly in this library system, there are very high rates of these diseases. There are many new and expectant mothers, and there are also high rates and risk of osteoporosis. So these are all things that need to be addressed in the LibGuide, which we will see in a moment. In putting the LibGuide together, the content that I wanted to put in had to fit into certain criteria. I wanted to be able to offer only free online materials or materials that were available through the library. I wanted them to be peer-reviewed or scholarly articles only. The way they were written needed to be accessible for non-professionals, but advanced reading is acceptable because most of the staff has higher education, so they don't need to be written at a high school or lower reading level. Most of them at least have a high school or bachelor's degree, if not a master's degree. So while I wanted it to be accessible for non-professionals, it's okay if a lot of them are scholarly or have lots of jargon or higher vocabulary. I wanted the articles to be preferably fewer than 5,000 words. A lot of them are much shorter than that. A couple of them are longer than that, but that was my goal in looking for them because these are busy professionals here, and this is like a outside of work staff initiative, so I wanted all of the articles to be something that was not going to be overwhelming for them, but that they were going to be able to find and utilize immediately. The materials I found were supposed to be written for beginners to intermediate runners and walkers. So most of the staff members are just beginning to start a racing, walking, or running regimen and are going from couch to 5K. So the materials on the LibGuide were aimed at preparing beginners and intermediate runners and walkers for their first 5K, or at least their first 5K in a while. And also I wanted them to be published within the last 3 to 5 years. Most of the materials, almost all of them, are published within the last 3 years, but I did make some exceptions within the last 5 years to include certain materials that I found to be especially useful. So let's go take a look at the LibGuide. Okay, here we are, the first page of the LibGuide. I have the Home tab, and I started with a LibGuide site introduction so that staff members in this fictional library system could get a feel for what the LibGuide is going to offer them and what it's there for. I also put a video, so there's like a introduction and video form as well. On this home tab, I also put the proper technique with the citation for the Mayo Clinic there. So this is proper walking technique, and then there's also proper running form right below that. That's a video from Runner's World. That I believe is the only non-scholarly article on the site, but it is still a professional and reputable source. And the video itself is very clear and useful, so I wanted to include that. Below it, I also posted the selection criteria for the resources that we just went over. Below the video on the right side of the page is my Pathfinder. Here I put a lot of different resources that I found to be useful, including lots of stuff from the Mayo Clinic, things that I found on different databases, things from the Cleveland Clinic and from National Institute of Health, lots of different sources so that I could cover lots of different topics. Some of my favorites were the ones on technology to help promote physical activity. This one goes over the effect of peer influence on exercise intensity and enjoyment. So they actually measured the relative enjoyment and speed of collegiate distance runners to see whether it was beneficial to run with others or to run solo. And so I thought this would be very useful for my library system. Another one, there's a big push for minimalist footwear and for barefoot running, and this is an article about that, so staff members can make that kind of decision. There's also the first one. There's a straight up plan for a 7-week training schedule for beginners, and it's made by Olympian Jeff Galloway. He's actually a runner that I've followed for a while, and he makes some great tutorials and books to get people running and preparing for marathons and races. So the schedule itself is very useful. But the Pathfinder there, all of them are linked at the top with the citations, and then my annotations are at the bottom. I tried to also cover the reading level in the annotation so that staff would be able to know what they were getting into. On the next tab, which was the Diagnosis and Treatment tab, I started out by posting a tutorial on how to use library health resources. Now, a lot of the staff are already familiar with this because they work in a library, they work in reference. Many of them have Masters of Library and Information Science, but a lot of them don't use it on a daily basis, and perhaps a lot of them have not even used it at all, some of the lower level positions, so or the positions that are not in reference. So it could be either a refresher or getting new users started. Also, it's just an overview of what is available, what databases this fictional library has subscriptions to that relate to health and exercise. So that's there to help them get acquainted with what other resources, if they couldn't find what they needed on this site or if they wanted to go further. On the other side, there's a list of common injuries or conditions for runners and walkers, and they're in alphabetical order. I posted little descriptions of each disorder from the articles themselves so that readers could get a good idea of what they were looking into. But for people who don't know, what injury they might have, I also wanted to put a symptom checker on here. So I used the Mayo Clinic symptom checker. Just made clear that in my writing below it, just that it would help them narrow the potential medical conditions. So it's not going to necessarily be a diagnosis. It's obviously not a diagnosis, but it can help you get a better idea of what kind of injury you might be dealing with and how serious it is. So that's what the symptom checker is there for. Below that, the National Institute of Health actually makes a group of videos that are advice on talking to your doctor. So I found that to be something that staff members might find very useful once they get an idea of what kind of injury they might have, or even if they don't know, when they go to actually talk to a professional and try to get a diagnosis and a treatment plan. These are some suggestions from the National Institute of Health on how to communicate effectively with your doctor to get the information you need across and to get the answers that you need from them. Also, the final video is just on understanding your diagnosis and treatment, which is also incredibly important, especially when you're dealing with an injury and preparing for a 5K. The next tab is the injury prevention tab, and on here I started out with some resources that ended up moving over to the home tab and the diagnosis and treatment tab, but I kept the ones that specifically fit under injury prevention most clearly on here, including selecting shoes. So here's a resource on finding the right shoes that I found that is actually a scholarly article. So, and I will add a citation for that, but it is from I found it on EBSCO from CRS, the Adult Health Advisor. Below that, there is a bunch of Cleveland Clinic advice for exercising for people who have different health conditions. There are people here, or there are people in the library system who probably have asthma, multiple sclerosis. As I said, there are lots of people who are either pregnant or have just had a baby, so wanted to be able to include them and give them effective information on how to prepare and plan for the 5K. Parkinson's, osteoporosis, heart health, back issues, treatment for arthritis, mind-body exercise and heart health, and then people who are overweight down at the bottom. I wanted all of them to have some resources available for them. And I was going to put the citations directly under it, but I found it to be a lot more visually appealing to be able to click more to see the citations instead of it cluttering up the view. I kind of didn't like that about the whole Pathfinder layout, is that you could see the citations before you could really see the titles and the descriptions, and they stood out a lot more. So since this was kind of up to me what I did with the rest of the LibGuide, I decided to go ahead and put those down at the bottom so that users could click a button to find out more information if they were interested in the article, and obviously just follow the link to the article itself. I'll obviously post the virtual oral report on this tab here. And originally I had started out with an injury management and resources tab, but all the materials that I put on there ended up fitting a little bit better and more clearly under the tabs that already existed. So I went ahead and made those invisible, and we'll take them off. The tags for my site, I went ahead and put in some tags to help people find it. And I changed all the URLs on the site to this sclis.libguides.com/5kinjuries, and each page has its own name. So this one's a lot cleaner than all the numbers and letters that were there before. This one was prevention, then I had the diagnosis and the home tab there. So that's supposed to make everything a little bit more clear. I also put a description of the site under the title at the top. So if you look at the preview of the site, it actually looks pretty neat and accessible. I was pretty happy with the way that the final product came out. So especially when you go from the behind the scenes view that we've just been on and going to the final results, I think that it turned out to looking really good and having a lot of really valuable information on there. So this is my LibGuide, and I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope that you find the resources to be of high quality and easily accessible. So thank you very much.